After months of testing, this is my ultimate oven brisket recipe. So for those of you without access to a smoker or a grill, you can now enjoy a delicious smoky brisket. And it starts with the brisket. Try to get the best quality you can. This is a choice grade brisket, and once it's out of the package, it's time to get it trimmed. So the oven is a cruel taskmaster because it cooks mainly with radiant heat, which is anything but the gentle low and slow that briskets are used to. So any parts of the brisket that are sticking out or too thin are going to absolutely get burned to a crisp. So to prevent that, we are going to trim this brisket into a uniform round shape. Start on the fat cap of the brisket and remove this hanging piece of meat called the mohawk. Then cut straight down from the mohawk all the way to the end of the brisket. And then trim the fat cap down to about 1/4 of an inch. Round out the edges of the brisket and then flip it over to cut out the deckle fat from the lean side. Also cut off all the fat from the trimmings and place it into a foil tray. We're gonna use this fat later on in the recipe. And now this brisket is ready for the next step. So this recipe is easily the most unique and most delicious oven brisket recipe I have ever tried. And I couldn't have done it without one of my subscribers, Donovan Gibson, who basically made this recipe, and I just slightly altered it to fit my taste. So a huge thank you to you, Donovan. First thing we're gonna do is submerge the brisket in lapsang tea. So lapsang tea is a Chinese tea that is dried on bamboo over a wood fire. And because of this, the tea has a nice, bold, smoky flavor that will help our oven brisket mimic a smoked one. Make a tea concentrate by pouring 12 ounces of hot water over 4 bags of lapsang tea. Put the brisket in a bag and pour the tea over the brisket and vacuum seal it and let it set at least 90 minutes. Alternatively, if you don't have a vacuum sealer, just let the brisket soak in a container for about 6 to 8 hours. And as the brisket soaks, let's make the glaze. So add 2 tablespoons of dark mushroom soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of water, and 1/2 teaspoon of smoked concentrate and mix. Now you can completely skip the smoked concentrate and the glaze altogether if you don't like liquid smoke, but I think it works well with this recipe. Once marinated, pat the brisket dry to remove any excess tea and then apply the glaze. Next, coat the brisket in hickory smoked salt for some additional smoke flavor. Now, this is the key to this recipe, the rub. And that's because each of the components of the rub gives the brisket incredible flavor. The first ingredient is a high quality coffee, like from Trade Coffee, sponsor of today's video. Let's see what Trade sent me from among all of the independent roasters Trade partners with. Airship Coffee's Buffalo Blend. Perfect. This medium roast coffee with notes of brown sugar and caramel will complement the bold and savory flavors in my rub recipe. It's also medium grind, which is not super fine, which will give us a nice Texas style crust on the finished brisket. So we'll add 1 tablespoon of coffee for our rub. Trade Coffee is a subscription-based service that makes it easy to discover new coffees. And you'll receive extremely fresh and unique coffee that Trade finds for you, because every bag is roasted fresh on demand and delivered on your schedule. So whether you need coffee for a recipe, to drink, or both like me, start the day off right and upgrade your morning routine with better coffee. Right now, Trade is offering my viewers a free bag of coffee with any subscription at drinktrade.com/antsbarbecue. That's drinktrade.com/antsbarbecue for a free bag of coffee with any subscription purchase. drinktrade.com/antsbarbecue. Thank you, Trade Coffee. Next, we need black cardamom, and make sure you use black cardamom, not green. They are very different. Black cardamom is dried over flame, so it has a smoky flavor, but is also cool and herby, giving off aromas that are kind of like a cross between mint and rosemary. So take 1/4 cup of full pods, deshell them, and grind them into a fine powder. And if you don't have these at your grocery store, I'll have a link in the description where you can buy it along with all of the other ingredients listed in this recipe. Then add in 2 tablespoons of smoked paprika, 2 tablespoons of onion powder, 2 tablespoons of granulated garlic, 1/4 cup of coarse black pepper, 1 tablespoon of MSG, and 1/2 teaspoon of activated charcoal powder. The charcoal powder is only for aesthetic purposes, to give the brisket that trademark barbecue black bark for YouTube thumbnails. So feel free to skip the charcoal powder altogether if you don't care. Once combined, give the brisket an even coat of the seasoning, and then place it on a wire rack over a disposable tray. This will keep the brisket away from the juices it releases during the cook so that you don't end up braising your brisket. And more importantly, the foil tray will prevent the brisket fat from dripping in your oven so you don't burn down your house. Place the brisket on the upper rack of the oven and place the fat trimmings on the lower one at 260 degrees Fahrenheit. After about 4 hours, take out the fat trimmings from the oven. We don't want to cook the fat for too long because it may burn and produce off flavors. You want it to be a nice yellow color, not brownish orange. Make sure to take out the big pieces of crispy fat or just strain it and put the liquid fat in a jar for future use. In about 8 to 9 hours, the brisket is ready to wrap. And we know this because the internal temperature is above 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and the fat on top of the brisket is completely rendered. And you'll know it's rendered when the fat is nice and sticky and your finger can basically go right through it. Next, take some butcher paper and place some of that rendered beef tallow on the paper before putting the brisket lean side down onto it. Wrap it up and put it back in the oven fat side up at 300 degrees Fahrenheit until it finishes. This should be around 190 to 195 degrees Fahrenheit internal. But an easy way to check is to stick it with a probe thermometer. And if it feels like you're probing a jar of peanut butter, then it's done. Shout out to Harry Sue for that tip. Let the brisket cool down on your countertop until it reaches an internal temperature of around 155 degrees Fahrenheit, and then place it in your oven at its lowest setting for 4 to 8 hours. My oven is recalibrated, so I have it set to 145 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the ideal temperature. Now, before I slice into this brisket, I need to cover a few things about this recipe. So the non-negotiables are the black cardamom, the smoked paprika, and the lapsang tea. You can pretty much add or subtract any other part of this recipe to your taste, and I'm sure it will turn out great. And you may have also noticed that my recipe does not use curing salt. So curing salt is a common ingredient for most oven brisket recipes because it basically gives a pink ring on the inside of the meat that mimics a smoke ring that you get from a barbecued brisket. From my testing, it gave the brisket a dry, almost crumbly texture, so I just completely omitted it from my recipe because it only gives the pink smoke ring. There's no effect on the flavor. And with that covered, let's go ahead and get this brisket sliced. I honestly can't believe that this is just a choice brisket that I picked up from Walmart and I cooked it in my oven. It's smoky and it's savory and it has this flavor. I think it's from the mushroom soy sauce and the MSG that just completely coats your mouth, and it just pairs so perfectly with the beef. This is incredible. Seriously, as soon as you're done watching this video, go to the store, buy a brisket, and try out this recipe. But before you do that, make sure to watch the next video on your screen where I made another oven recipe, this time cooking a ribeye steak like Max the Meat Guy. And I'll see you guys over there.